Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special presentation of SFMTA's 2022 Muni Service Plan proposals. I hope folks have had a chance to check out the plans on SFMTA's site, but even if you haven't, I think you'll learn all about them in tonight's presentation. I also want to welcome everyone to Transit Month. We had a great kickoff day on September 1st, talking to riders all around town and giving away special gifts like the limited edition Muni Squishies. They are very popular, and yes, I will be asking for more. We had a successful ride-along and rally last Wednesday with all the supervisors and the mayor participating, as well as Director Tumlin. It could not have happened without our board of directors and our member volunteers, so thank you so much to everyone who showed up. We were really excited at that rally to hear broad support for more funding for Muni and an understanding of how important that is. I personally think of the event as our kickoff for whatever funding campaigns we will be taking on in 2022. So you can check out transitmonth.org to get involved in our transit ride contest, to nominate transit heroes, and to learn more. You can also register for our next event, which is next Wednesday, September 22nd. Our partners at SPIN are sponsoring Transit Safety for All, a discussion we've been wanting to have about what safety on transit means for different people and how we can use innovative approaches and center riders to find solutions. We've got a really great group of panelists for that, including SFMTA's Chief Security Officer, Kimberly Burris, Alliance for Girls Senior Advocacy Manager, Halima Barucha, District 7 Supervisor, Myrna Melgar, and SPIN Senior Streets and Equity Manager, Lakeisha Wright. Again, you can go to transitmonth.org to learn more and register for that event and others. If you like our work, if you think having a transit advocacy organization at the table is important, speaking up for riders, making sure we move forward with a robust Muni funding, please become a member today. We are largely member supported, and it's from our members that we get ideas, we get volunteers to make our work possible, and we get our political clout. So I want to thank our current and active members, many of whom are here tonight, and invite everyone else to join us. We cannot do this without your support. So with that, let's get started with tonight's program. I want to welcome Jeffrey Tumlin, Director of Transportation, also Transit Planning Manager Sean Kennedy, and Transit Planner Steve Bolin. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and for all your hard work on helping San Francisco to plan Muni's future. And with that, I'll hand it over to Director Tumlin.
Thanks, Kat, and thanks, Kat and Zach, for all you and the rest of the San Francisco Transit Riders Union does to support Muni and our recovery every day. We are very reliant upon your advocacy to help us find a path forward in what is still the worst financial crisis that SFMTA has ever faced. So speaking of which, let's go to the next slide and just remind everyone, one of the reasons why we are here is that COVID has resulted in dramatic losses in two of our three most critical sources of revenue. Parking fees and transit fares. Parking revenue is still down about 30%, and transit fare revenue is still down about 80%. One of the things that we're really struggling with here in San Francisco is that the way Muni is funded is rather unique among transportation agencies. First of all, we're a city department, but also an enterprise organization. We're required to pay our own way, mostly through fares and parking fees, but also through a fixed general fund set aside. As such, we can't borrow money to balance our books. We've got to balance our books every year, and if we run out of money, including our small reserve fund, we end up in the catastrophic situation of having to dramatically slash service and lay off our workforce. It's something that we very much do not want to do. Next slide, please. We're, of course, very grateful to the federal government for the COVID relief funding that they have given us. That money covers our COVID-related losses for last year and this year. We've already spent over half of that money just staying afloat, and we'll need to spend the rest of it to basically continue as we're continuing now. San Francisco, uniquely, however, is facing a slower recovery than really any other city in the United States, and Muni for a couple of reasons. One is that here in San Francisco, a big chunk of our transit ridership are downtown office workers. San Francisco has the highest rate of work from home among cities of our kind in the United States. And everything that we're hearing from businesses and the controller's office is to expect about a 20% loss in total transit ridership and probably about a 40% loss in downtown related transit ridership and parking revenue for the next several years. So we're needing to pay very close attention to the future, while at the same time, we also pursue additional funding sources so we can continue our recovery. We know that San Francisco's economy cannot recover without Muni there. Sean, could you bring up the slides again? So we're working hard both to accelerate Muni expansion. At the same time, we find new sources of funding in order to sustain that expansion and get to even more expansion. Back when I first arrived at SFMTA just under 2 years ago in December of 2019, we inherited the Muni Reliability Working Group report, which pointed out the severe structural deficit we were facing. But also proposed a funding plan to get us to 110% of pre-COVID service hours. So that is what we are aiming for. And this winter's service restoration is a part of that. Next slide, please, Sean. Meanwhile, we have rebuilt the Muni system, I don't know, Sean, 6 times in the last 18 months during COVID, focusing on dramatically changed travel patterns and really focusing on getting essential workers to work. And we're really proud that the way we have arranged service means that ridership is coming back strong. We're about, in total, 45% of our pre-COVID ridership. Next slide, please. But more importantly, what we're finding is that our weekend ridership is gaining at much higher rates than the rest of the system. And that is particularly true on the lines where we invested heavily in frequency in order to maintain social distancing during COVID. Next slide, please. So on our lines like the 8 and the 9, basically all the lines that are in thick blue here on this map. Next slide, please. Our current weekday ridership is averaging about 75% of pre-COVID ridership on our high frequency lines. But more importantly, next slide, please. On the weekends, or when you subtract out the downtown trips from our weekday ridership, we're well above 80% of pre-COVID ridership. So this is on lines like the 14 Rapid, and the 14 Expresses, which you see in dark blue, which is over 90% of pre-COVID ridership. The 8 and the 8XN services, the 22 Fillmore, the 9 San Bruno, and basically all of our other high frequency lines. So what we've learned from this is that where we have invested in high frequency, high reliability, reduced delay, and where we've invested outside of the financial district, our ridership is back. The problem that we're facing is all of those giant office buildings downtown that are empty and are likely to stay lightly populated for quite some time. Next slide, please. Nonetheless, we are working really, really hard in order to hire up and train up new operators, mechanics, and all of the teams of people that are necessary in order to deliver transit service. So the hiring and training that we're doing right now will allow us to do another increment of service expansion, much like we just did in mid-August. So what we're trying to figure out is how should we best allocate that service? So Sean will walk through several different options, 3 different options of allocating that service in different ways. And a couple things I want to make sure that you all understand. Each of these options has exactly the same amount of new service hours. And each of these options within individual neighborhoods also has the same amount of transit service per neighborhood. It's just allocated in different ways. These services are resource constrained based upon where we'll be with money and staffing this winter, but we'll also be doing additional planning work once we're done with this winter service expansion to look at how should our transit service expansion be when we are able to get to 100% of pre-COVID service, and when we find money in order to get to 110% of pre-COVID service. So we'll be doing that work this winter and spring, and we'll therefore have, we're hoping a bit more time to have additional engagement in that work. So next slide, please. And yeah, let me turn it over to Sean Kennedy, our transit planning manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, or should I say good evening, everyone. So I uh, video this call. Um, so Jeff covered most of these points. I believe I do want to point out that we're roughly about 75% right now of pre-COVID service hours, and as Jeff pointed out, about 45% of pre-COVID ridership numbers. And we will be, as Jeff said, hiring and training staff, and over the next probably 6 with both you all as well as stakeholders throughout the city for not only what winter 2022 should look like, but looking forward, what does the rest of 22 look like, and then 2023. So as you all will recall, back in March of 2020, the world looked much different, and the mayor issued her stay-at-home order. Several weeks later, we cut Muni service back drastically, went to 17 core lines. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, we've since restored service 6 times since that initial cut. We've added a ton of service in our busy corridors, most notably Potrero and Mission. We've created some new Muni lines, like the 15, which goes from Bayview up to Soma, as well as the 58, which goes around Lake Merced. We've modified some lines, which I'm going to go to in more detail here in a minute. And then all of these changes really have been focusing improvements and resources on neighborhoods identified in the Muni service equity strategy. And basically that was, of course, obviously on purpose. We were trying to support essential trips, as well as supporting the need for capacity on our well-used lines like Mission Street, for example, to make sure that we can maintain social distancing on our buses. So I want to talk for a minute about the modified line. There's been a number that were modified, but 3 specifically.
Sean, you are having some bandwidth issues.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's okay. You're cutting out though a lot. Is there anything you can do to help with your bandwidth?
I think it's because I'm doing this.
Do you want me to present the slides or have Steve present?
Huge. Yeah, would that be possible? That would be fantastic.
Okay. Jeff, this is Steve. I'm happy to take over at this point.
Yeah. So Sean, if you can stop sharing, that should give Steve the ability to share, and hopefully then we can hear you.
Okay. I don't see it as a share option. I'm very sorry. I don't understand why that is. Zoom. Okay, Jeff, you're sharing. Okay.
Excellent.
Can everyone see that? So
Yes.
as Sean was saying, we've made a number of changes. Sean, are you there?
Steve, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, it still sounds bad. I'll jump in. So as Sean was saying, we've made a number of changes to a variety of routes during COVID.
So
okay, Sean, I think your connection is bad. I'm going to take it from here. So, you see here a list of routes and combinations of routes in different parts of the city that we made changes to during COVID. We want to highlight a couple of
Hey, Steve, it seems like you're muted.
Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
All right, apologies for the technical difficulties. Okay, I'm going to talk about, I'll take over the presentation from here. So some changes we made during COVID, you saw them listed on the previous screen, some routes that have been changed. Here you can see in the southwest corner of the city, a change that we implemented in August, a new Route 58 going around Lake Merced on Sloat where the Route 23 used to be, which now goes up to West Portal. And the 58 actually connects down to Westlake in Daly City and provides access to a retail shopping hub there, which we thought was a good change to make. Next slide. Another example is the 35 and 48, where we made some changes in Clipper, sort of the western part of Noe Valley. Next slide. And the J Church, which is still not operating in the subway. I will just point out that since it's been surface only, the reliability of the J Church has dramatically improved, and we do have some findings already that the total travel time to the Embarcadero has actually improved even with the transfer. Next slide. So here is what our system currently looks like. You're all probably pretty familiar with this map. I'll just reiterate kind of where we are now. You can see it left in the bullet points. We are down to 7 of our pre-COVID all-day lines that are not currently operating. We are up to about 75% of our pre-COVID service hours. Once again, we are working very hard to both hire and train staff in order to get back to pre-COVID levels. And we will be, coming out soon with a plan for expanded service, and we'll be doing another round of public engagement around that. We are also looking at a variety of funding options, which I will let Jeff speak to. Next slide. So the main thing that we're here to talk to you about tonight is our 2022 service plan. Just to make clear again right up front, we have mentioned this, but I do want to reiterate what we are talking about now is changes to service that would be implemented in early 2022, but that we hope could be undone and built upon, and we could see expanded service possibly later in 2022 or early in 2023. We are looking at some additional revenue options, but right now what we have in front of us is a need to plan for our next round of service changes coming up in just a few months, actually quite soon. So what we've done is, we've put out 3 scenarios, and I think probably most people here in this meeting tonight have seen our website, sfmta.com/2022 network. If you haven't, I would recommend that you actually open that up in another window and go look at that right now, because there's a lot of details there that, in the interest of leaving enough time for Q&A, we're not going to walk through all of them tonight, although we're happy to answer any questions. I will talk just for a moment at a little bit higher level about those 3 alternatives that we put out there. I'm sorry, previous slide. Thank you. One of them, the familiar scenario, all of those routes you see in orange, I referred before to the 7 all-day routes that are not currently running. All of them would be put back the way they were pre-pandemic under that familiar scenario. Those are all the routes in orange that you see on the map here. It's the 2, 3, 6, 10, 21, 28R, 47. I hope I didn't skip one there. But they are all shown on the map, as well as portions of the 31 and the 43. So the familiar scenario basically restores the pre-COVID network with midday weekday frequencies on all of those routes. What we're calling the frequent scenario would be a pretty dramatic departure. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. We have a map to show that. But basically it would reallocate, it would eliminate certain routes and reallocate those resources to parallel or alternative routes serving the same rider base, within the same corridors in the same neighborhoods. And in the process, by putting those resources on busier routes, allow us to really increase frequency in some of our core routes and work toward what we've been calling the 5-minute network, which is a concept we've been talking about a lot lately, and which we'll talk more about in just a moment. There is a third scenario, which is sort of an in-between and a mixture, and so we call it the hybrid scenario. And as you can imagine, it's sort of a midpoint between those two. The frequent scenario would eliminate 5 routes, the 2, the 3, the 21, the 47, and I'm forgetting the 5th right now, the 6th, thank you. And the hybrid scenario would only eliminate 2 routes, the 3 and the 47. But just to reiterate, all of those saved resources from those routes would go into parallel, in some cases only a couple of blocks away, very busy routes, or alternate services. And as we'll see in a moment, we've done a lot of analysis that suggests that the net effect of those changes would actually improve access to a variety of destinations for most riders. Next slide. So there are some commonalities that I just want to make sure everyone understands. No one will be more than 2 or 3 blocks, or a quarter mile at most. We've done the analysis. I think 98% of San Francisco residents would remain within a quarter mile of a Muni stop. The 28R 19th Avenue Rapid, which is one of those 7 routes, would come back under any alternative. The 43 would be extended from its current terminus in California, at least to the Presidio. And the 10 Townsend would operate between SF General over Potrero Hill up into the financial district under any alternative. Next route, please, or next slide, please. So I don't want to dwell on these maps too long. Again, all of the detailed information about our proposals is available online at sfmta.com/2022network. This is the familiar alternative, and everything you see in green is one of those routes that's not currently operating, but that would be put back under this alternative. Next slide. The frequent alternative would result in a lot of change, a fair amount of change. Again, 5 of those routes would no longer operate, but there would be alternatives, improvements to parallel routes in every one of those cases. You can see those in pink here. The gold are the segments that would no longer operate. And the green, again, are services that would be restored, including the 28R, the 43 in part, and the 10 as well. Next slide. And again, that hybrid scenario is sort of a balance between those two, which a couple of routes would no longer operate under, but we would make a variety of improvements to other routes as well. Next slide. So we've gotten the question, and it's a good question. Why are we going through this process? Why aren't we just restoring the pre-COVID network? And part of the answer is we're seeing a shift in service patterns, as Jeff laid out in some detail at the start of this presentation. But really, when it comes down to it, is there are a few key factors that riders care deeply about. One of them is service reliability. Prior to the pandemic, most of the conversation around Muni service had to do with the reliability of our service going back for many years, even decades. Another one is frequency. And another one is just access to destinations. Why do we have a transit network? What purpose does it serve? It's to get people where they want to go. Reliability, and we're happy to talk about this, is a problem that we are addressing in a variety of ways right now. And we've seen some pretty dramatic improvements recently. This current planning effort is really focused on frequency of service as well as access. And we'll show you a few maps. I've alluded before to the improved frequency on some of our busiest routes that might be possible under some of these alternatives, and also the increased access. And when we talk about access in this context, what we mean is the number of different types of destinations that would be accessible within a 30-minute travel time, including any increases in walk time. Next slide. So here you can see what we think is a pretty clear illustration of why we underwent this process in the first place and why we want to put these alternatives out there for discussion. Whether or not they're the way we ultimately want to go, we want to hear from you about. But under these different alternatives, you can see some fairly dramatic changes in that travel shed access, like I talked about before. Here you can see under the frequent alternative in particular, a lot more San Franciscans would be within a quarter mile or about a 5-minute walk for an average able-bodied adult of a Muni stop. Next slide. And part of what we're trying to do here, we've started to talk about this, and I think probably most folks in this call are familiar with this, what we call our 5-minute network. And the idea here, and we'll have a slide that shows our ultimate vision in a moment, but the idea is to build out a grid all over the city of routes that operate every 5 minutes. And that is the service level. And at the same time, those would be the corridors that we would focus on from a capital perspective. Our Muni Forward program, we have a lot of corridors that we want to address over the next few years. But as we sort of move into that next generation, there would be additional improvements in those 5-minute corridors, really sort of the next generation of transit priority street improvements to ensure reliability and to ensure that we can really make that 5-minute service operate. You walk up to the stop, you don't have to consult a schedule. There's always a bus or a train coming. Next slide. So we can put a down payment on the 5-minute network with some of these changes. Under the frequent alternative, you see that 5-minute network starts to grow. A key addition is the 22 Fillmore, which of course is a key crosstown route. And again, we have seen a fairly substantial drop in demand for downtown travel, and yet, crosstown neighborhood to neighborhood travel, that demand remains relatively strong, and we are trying to respond to that with some of the changes here. Next slide. And here you see the hybrid alternative. Again, it's sort of in between what you would see with the familiar are the frequent alternatives. Next slide. And just to reiterate, what we're talking about tonight is starting to move in that direction potentially. We are going to be releasing a new plan in the next couple of months that shows what we could do with expanded resources. What we want to move toward ultimately is something that looks a lot like this. You can see it's a strong grid all over the city of 5-minute service transfers. If we can make them reliably, and again, we would be focusing our Muni Forward transit priority improvements in these corridors, those transfers should be relatively seamless, and you would be able to travel freely and relatively quickly all throughout the city and not just in certain parts of it. Next slide. So there are a few maps here, and I'll just sort of move through them quickly. But I referred before to some of the analysis that we did around, the number of different types of destinations that could be accessed within a 30-minute travel time, even incorporating additional walk time to stops under the different alternatives. So the pattern that you'll see is under this frequent concept, you can see in the areas where we are making changes, an improvement. In some cases, a fairly dramatic improvement in the number of different types of destinations that you can reach within that 30-minute travel time, door to door, including walk time. This is jobs and educational opportunities, which is just numbers of students on various campuses. And under the frequent alternative, again, the change is largely positive. Next slide. Under the hybrid alternative, it is a little bit more of a mixture, and that's because we, aren't focusing quite as much on trying to extend the reach of the system and a little bit more on kind of maintaining some of those previous services that were there. Next slide. So different types of destinations. If you want to continue through the slides here, I think we can move pretty quickly. The same pattern holds true where you see a pretty dramatic improvement under the frequent alternative. A little bit more of a mixture under the hybrid alternative, depending on where you are in the city. These are, the origins that you're coming from, where you can reach the destinations you're going to for all kinds of different types of uses. Here you see pharmacies. We did a pretty thorough analysis, and it was an iterative analysis as we developed these concepts. We refined them on the basis of this ongoing analysis because we really were focused on improving access. Next slide. So community outreach, I think one of our outreach staff is here. Mariana, would you like to speak to this for a moment?
Mariana may not be a panelist. So Steve, perhaps you could just continue through this.
I'd be happy to. So we're doing what we feel like is a pretty robust community engagement process. Obviously, we're here tonight. Right now, we are doing a whole lot of these sort of direct stakeholder meetings. Some of them are large events like tonight. Some of them are small groups. Coming up next week, and I would encourage everyone here, if you're really interested in this process, a great occasion to, interact with other people who have opinions about this. We expect to get a broad range of attendees. We're going to be doing 3 open house events and 2 what we call office hours, which are basically, there's not a presentation, but staff are available, staff being me, I think in these cases, to answer any questions you might have. 5 of them next week, as well as an informational item presentation at this coming Tuesday SFMTA board meeting, if anyone would like to participate there. Again, we have what we think is a really nice summary of everything we're proposing with a lot of details in it, what we call our story map, which is a nice interactive website. And you can find that linked from, again, I'm going to mention this, I want to make sure everyone's got this, sfmta.com/2022 network. Again, we are doing all of these stakeholder meetings, several dozen of them, as a matter of fact. And we are, we postered all over the city along routes that might be affected in one way or another, and a variety of outreach techniques, including outreach to very specific groups, including a lot of senior and persons with disabilities groups. Our outreach timeline, really our project timeline, we are sort of in that second window right now, or sort of our first verging on our second, where we are sharing our 3 alternatives with the public, as broad a swath of the public as we can. Again, we are going to be going to our board to present these alternatives next week, and we are going to be continuing this initial phase of outreach through early October. We are going to take everything we've heard, put it together as best we can, and we are going to develop a final proposed set of recommendations to bring back to our board in early December. December 7th, if you want to mark that date on your calendar, is the date that we're targeting right now. Next slide.
And Steve, I'm here now as a panelist if you want me to jump in at any point.
Okay, I think I've got it at this point. But,
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you very much. So again, I've touched on all of this previously, but just to reiterate, because it's very important, here is the website address. We have a survey there that we would love you to take. We've already gotten about 1,500 responses to our survey. Pretty good response. It hasn't been up that long. We have these 3 open houses next week, and we've tried to schedule these at different times that might be convenient for different folks, different times of day, weekend versus weekday. And we've also got these office hours events where we can answer any detailed questions. I'm sure there'll be some questions tonight. We probably won't have time to get to everyone's questions, but you can always follow up with us at those events. And finally, we have an email address where you can send any comments directly to us, and those will go on the record. Next slide.
Just to add quickly to that, we also have a hotline where we are assisting people in taking the survey if they don't have access to internet. We are dictating the questions, they can respond to them, and we fill out the survey for them. And we will be doing informational drop-offs with all of the public participation event information and paper surveys at CBOs throughout the city. The postering for this project with the website, the hotline information, went to about 600 stops throughout the city, with particular focus on obviously the most impacted areas, equity areas, and we have a couple of youth-focused outreach events as well.
Okay, thank you, Mariam. So, again, we're not going to, walk through every single detail. These are pretty complex proposals. All the information is available online, and we can answer any questions tonight. I did want to talk about one example area just to sort of illustrate some of the basic underlying principles that we're talking about. And that area is basically the 21 Hayes corridor through the Western Addition. And I say this as somebody who the 21 Hayes was my first route as a San Francisco resident that I took every day. So the idea here is we have three pretty distinct alternatives. We have a familiar alternative where the 21 Hayes is restored at its previous midday weekday frequency, as well as its pre-COVID alignment, which means it goes, not only from Golden Gate Park and St. Mary's Hospital down Hayes to Market Street, but it continues on Market Street all the way down to the Ferry Building, even though we aren't necessarily seeing the same level of demand downtown. Under the frequent alternative, which is the most dramatic departure, I'm sorry, go back to the previous slide if you don't mind, thank you. Under the frequent alternative, which is our most dramatic departure from sort of the status quo or the pre-COVID status quo, the 21 is not restored. And I do want to reiterate that this is our 2022 service plan, which is a resource constrained scenario. And this does not necessarily mean that the route is permanently eliminated. I want to be careful in how I frame that, because we're only talking about the near term, and we're hoping to raise additional revenues, which could provide us with additional options. But in terms of what we implement and operate in February of 2022, under that frequent alternative, the 21 would not be operating, but we would take those resources and put them into both Fulton and McAllister, the 5 corridor, as well as Haight Street. So you see that the 7 there on Haight, and the 6 doesn't operate in this scenario, and there are alternatives for the 6 that we can talk about. But the 7 runs every 5 minutes on Haight Street. That would be an improvement of about 20% over the current or the pre-COVID level on Haight Street. The Fulton corridor, the 5 local, historically has operated about every 10 minutes. It would improve to actually every 5 minutes. I'm sorry, this map says 6, and we need to update that, but it would operate twice as often. So you would see a pretty dramatic improvement in both the Fulton corridors or McAllister in this segment and Haight as alternatives to Hayes. Now, the walk is 2 or 3 blocks over to McAllister from Hayes, and parts of that are quite hilly. And we do understand and respect that that is certainly more challenging for some of our riders more than it is for others. And that is the sort of value or prioritization trade-off that we're asking folks to talk to us about through this exercise. The hybrid alternative, it does maintain the 21. However, it operates a little less frequently. It's every 20 minutes midday, and it doesn't go down Market Street. It connects to the BART station and all of the various transit services on Market Street at Civic Center BART by the main library. So this is a good illustration of sort of the differences between those 3 alternatives. Next slide. Here you can see it zoomed in a little bit better, just in case any of that wasn't quite clear. The gold here represents a segment that's not restored, at least for the time being, under this alternative. But the pink represents changes. And not only do you see McAllister and Haight getting much more frequent transit service, but under the frequent alternative, the 22 would operate more frequently, and you would have a 49 rapid service on Van Ness that was operating much more frequently than the 49 has previously or than it's currently operating. Next slide. And again, the hybrid is a little bit of a compromise, if you will, where the 21 is maintained, but it's only operating between Market Street and the park. Next slide. So, this is basically in table form, what you saw in the maps previously, what would happen under the different alternatives in terms of access from different points within the neighborhood, and also the sort of median overall for the larger area. And again, the takeaway here, the sort of broad pattern, is that the frequent would increase the number of destinations. The frequent alternative would increase the number of destinations that are within a 30-minute or a 45-minute, for that matter, travel time from any given point, including the walk time, whereas the hybrid would be sort of a mixture of that. I believe we're at our conclusion now. Yes, I think we're ready to move on to Q&A.
Great, thank you so much. That was a lot of information to absorb. I'm glad we're getting it early. It'll take us some while to absorb it. But we do have some great questions from our members. So a lot around funding. If somebody wants to talk to what strategies are you taking for creating reliable long-term revenue sources, especially if you're thinking that ridership may not come back anytime soon. How does that federal stimulus money figure into bringing back service? Are there ways to get more money, more funding out of the general fund? Where else can you look for funding or advocate for funding? All of those questions.
So that's a lot of material. So let me try to unpack a little bit of that. So in parallel with our work for winter service restoration, our entire budget team has been focused on economic recovery. A lot of that work is summarized at sfmta.com/T2050 or Transportation 2050. You can also Google Muni or SFMTA Transportation 2050. That summarizes our overall budget picture, as well as all of the different potential sources of revenue that we might be able to tap in order to get us where we need to go. So part of it is the technical and analytical side. The other part of it is the political side. The prospects for winning at the ballot for almost any measure right now are tight. People are nervous, businesses are hurting, there's a tremendous amount of instability out there. And so in order for us to actually win the revenue sources that we're interested in, we're going to need pretty much unanimous support from all 11 members of the Board of Supervisors, plus the mayor, plus advocacy organizations, including business. And that's where we desperately need your help. We're allowed to do the technical work to figure out what's the need and what are the different sources. We're limited in our ability to do the political work in order to convince folks that this is needed and in order to win votes from all the folks that we need to win votes from. So that's where we're very much looking forward to engaging with the San Francisco Transit Riders Union, and that work should be happening shortly. We've basically completed the technical side, and now we need to build consensus around need. We're also looking for short-term sources. One of those, of course, is the San Francisco General Fund that we have no control over. And again, it goes into the political territory. There is a tremendous amount of demand on the San Francisco General Fund. And in order to have a piece of that allocated to Muni, we would need very strong political support from across San Francisco. Did I cover each of the pieces of those?
I think so. I guess a little bit, you said it a little bit at the beginning about how the federal stimulus money figures into bringing back service.
Yes.
Where's the $1 billion going?
Yeah. So there's two kinds of federal stimulus that we're expecting. The first and most important is the operating budget relief, the COVID relief that is on its way. So that's over $1 billion, which seems like a lot of money, but we already spent over half of that just staying afloat. And now we need to figure out over how many years do we need to spread the remaining operating budget stimulus. So if we get greater certainty about not going bankrupt in 2023, we can start accelerating the spending in order to expand service more rapidly. Right now, though, no one is telling us that there is relief. We have no promises from the rest of city government. We have no promises from the state or federal government that any additional money is forthcoming. So we're needing to spread that money out so we don't end up in a catastrophic situation of having to lay off our workforce and slash service. It is a risk game. And I think all of you know, at least in terms of experimenting with our service, I am the most risk-happy general manager this agency has had in decades. One thing I am quite conservative about risking is the livelihoods of my workforce. As soon as we get additional certainty on money, we're going to put the throttle down full in terms of service restoration. In that vein, what we're doing right now is to stabilize all of the bases of the agency so that once we do get new money, that we can spend that quickly. So making sure that we have enough mechanics, making sure that our human resources division is fully staffed. Whether we're growing or shrinking, there are certain parts of the agency that we need to pay attention to in order to be resilient. And so that's been a big part of our effort. The other side of federal relief is capital. Right now, Congress is trying to come to final agreement on a major infrastructure bill. So what we're trying to do as an agency is to find ways of being able to spend that capital money in ways that save us on the operating budget side or allow us to do sleight of hand tricks with our budget in order to shift money that is local and fungible in order to be able to direct that money out of building transit lanes and towards expanding transit service hours. And so a lot of what our budget team has been doing as well is helping to make us very competitive for any forthcoming federal capital money and to do it in a way that saves on the operating side. And by that, I mean, for example, we have a contract pending at the Board of Supervisors about creating a contract to buy new light rail vehicles. This is incredibly important to us because we think it is likely that we'll be able to get federal money to buy new light rail vehicles. The new light rail vehicles save us tremendously on maintenance costs that save us money that we can then allocate to service expansion. Those new light rail vehicles are also vastly more reliable. So we can basically, it's the equivalent of 15% additional service with our new vehicles compared to the old vehicles and the amount of extra service that we needed to deliver just in order to deal with the fact that the Breda cars break down all the time. So that's one example of ways that we're gearing up. Others include investing more in Muni speed and reliability. Many of the investments that we've done during COVID in quick build fashion have gotten us a 20% travel time advantage. And we've been able to then turn the buses around that much more quickly. So a 20% travel time savings equals 20% more frequency equals 20% more capacity. And some of the big ticket items we want to try to pursue are continued investment in the subway. We were shocked actually at just how much benefit we got out of the small subway investments we made during COVID. We'd love to be able to capitalize upon those and continue getting better speed, reliability, and capacity out of the subway.
Excellent, thank you. And you reminded me I need to get out there and look for those LRV vehicles, the new ones with the new seats in them. I haven't seen those yet. Some are on the streets, I understand.
With butt divots.
Yeah, I think.
With butt divots.
With butt divots, exactly. Looking for our butt divots. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that does sort of address most of the funding questions I'm sure will come up. Getting back to the map that we're talking about and like what some of the decisions that were made, a few people are asking why weren't adding entirely new lines considered in the process? For example, if you lost the 2 Clement, but you got a new north-south line serving Richmond and Sunset, like if you added connectivity in a different way.
So we have, actually, we did invest in a new line during COVID, which was the 15 Bayview Hunters Point Express. That was a really, really hard decision for us as we were struggling in the worst days of COVID. But one of the things that we had found was that Bayview Hunters Point, or Hunters Point really, was the only substantial neighborhood in San Francisco that had never had a 1-seat ride to major transit centers and to the downtown. And we wanted to make sure that as we were rearranging transit service, that we were not only equalizing service throughout San Francisco, but also correcting for 100 years of inequity. Some of what we did as well in the southwestern part of the city was invented some new lines in order to deal with places that were causing a lot of reliability problems like St. Francis Circle. So bringing the 23 into West Portal and rearranging the lines out around Lake Merced also introduced new service to Westlake Village, which is one of the key retail nodes for southwestern San Francisco, even though it happens to be in Daly City. So we have been eagerly trying to do what we could in order to match our service allocation with what we could see was changes in travel behavior, as well as rider and constituent suggestions. But by the same token, knowing that we were significantly constrained. So one of the things that we will definitely want to be engaging with San Francisco on as we plan for the 100% and 110% service is what are those lines that are missing And just like we're planning right now, is it new lines that we need or greatly improved speed, reliability, and frequency on our main lines, like the 28 and the 29? I would love to see not only rapid services on the 20 and the 29, but greatly improved frequency, speed, and reliability.
Great, thank you. I look forward to the day we can fix St. Francis Circle so that we're not losing service specifically because one intersection is so hard to get through. Having to change service so dramatically because that one intersection is so difficult. More service questions. Why is the 14X Mission Express excluded from all 3 plans?
Yeah, so none of the plans include the downtown-oriented expresses, largely because that's the part of the city where we've lost an overwhelming share of ridership. So we do include the rapid lines and on many of the corridors that provide relatively speedy service where the demand is the highest. And unfortunately, that is something that we've faced citywide. So the peak only expresses, for example, the 41 and all the expresses from every neighborhood where those are not on the list yet. We expect that they get prioritized as more and more workers come back to downtown San Francisco.
Great, thanks. The gap between West Portal.
Steve and Sean, please do dive in if I'm not getting the full story.
I'm happy to. One thing I'll briefly add to that is, this current exercise is focused on our all-day routes, which are the focus of a lot of public concern. It's not just about necessarily services to the financial district, but routes that run during the peak only. And in fact, if you look at our current schedules, you'll find that our all-day routes are generally operating at about the same frequency throughout the day on weekdays and weekends. And that is because a lot of our peak service was just about, prior to COVID, was just about being able to provide enough capacity for that spike in demand for those traditional downtown commutes, which simply is not there right now.
Great, thank you. On the gap between West Portal and the 57 and 58, it requires bridging using the M, like getting from West Portal to where the 57 and 58 are. This requires 2 transfers. It can really increase trip time. Are there changes planned around these connections at all in any of these plans?
Sean, we're still not hearing you. Sean, you may want to, why don't you try joining with your sound only on your phone? And Steve, meanwhile, can you answer?
Dang it.
Oh, now we can hear you, Sean. The short answer to that is I think we're looking at some possible modifications to that. It is a new service pattern we're trying out. We've had already some pretty robust conversations with community groups in the southwestern part of the city, and we are certainly open to adjusting this. We felt like the previous pattern could be improved upon, and we are still looking at possible refinements.
Yeah, and so that the whole southwestern part of the city will absolutely be part of our analysis for our 100% service plan. It's what is out there right now is not adequate.
Agreed. Agreed, and we've been hearing that as well. Excuse me. As for timing, we're talking about maybe finalizing this in early December at the SFMTA board meeting, and then when would it roll out, whatever the next expansion is, and then what do you think, given all the unknowns of financing and funding that we have, what do you think the next service expansion would be? When would that happen?
So we're currently targeting February for the next round of service expansion. It is dependent upon a whole sequence of events around hiring and training. So as we get closer, we can hone in on a date. I don't want to overpromise. And there could be things that could hold us up in terms of our ability to actually fully deliver. So currently targeting February, and we'll let you know as it gets closer what the exact date will be. And then for the next round of service expansion, if we're able to secure new sources of revenue, even in the short term, it looks like we can continue additional rounds of service expansion at about this current pace. So going from August to February is about the cycle of hiring and training and delivering service. Well, I say that even though my poor team is terribly, terribly overworked, and our transit planning team has an over 50% vacancy rate right now. So I don't want to overwork them too much, but that is about the pace. So the total amount of service that we can restore is governed by the available budget. The pace of service restoration is governed by hiring and training, if that makes sense.
Sounds about right. And we've had this discussion before where, and you alluded to it earlier, or talked about it earlier, of making sure that you're investing in certain job types so that you can expand fast once we have the funding ready to go. Great. So between these different maps, we all know San Francisco has lots of hills all over the place. And with these maps, and they look flat and lines on a map, have you done an analysis of hills, walking, inclines, as well as distance, just flat distance between these three alternatives? What is that? Have you done that walking analysis, and what has that shown you?
Steve, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. A quantitative analysis, no, we are certainly cognizant. Everyone on this team is intimately familiar with the landscape of San Francisco. So we are certainly cognizant of some of the grades involved. I mentioned earlier that, my first regular ride in San Francisco was the 21 and the 22. I lived at the corner of Hayes and Fillmore. And that is obviously on the side of Alamo Hill. And so I'm quite cognizant of that, as are all the other members of the team. That is something that when we go to consolidate all of the feedback we've received from the public and develop a final set of alternatives, that's going to be a very important part of it, along with, and I just want to take the opportunity to emphasize this point, the equity piece of it. Everything we do as an agency now, and Jeff can tell you more about that, is really framed through that equity lens. And so I think we're going to be looking at, the sort of known barriers to walking or rolling for seniors and persons with disabilities, as well as, racial justice and social justice issues as well.
Thank you. Let's see. This is a really good one. Each of these three plans is ideally a stepping stone, as we've mentioned, with additional improvements to be implemented in coming years, depending on funding and everything else. How might those future improvements differ depending on which alternate is selected now? How does that impact those future options?
So I don't think, as you've seen, given the all the kind of experimenting that we've done with the Muni system during COVID, all that the current choice means is that it gives us an opportunity to learn from that experiment. If whatever option we choose now doesn't work, we can take a different approach next time. If there are pieces of what we choose that work really well, we can hold on to those and jettison the pieces that don't. So what we're trying to do is to deliver the best possible service we can, given our constrained resources, collect data, collect feedback, and make adjustments in order to do the best we can. While at the same time striving to build trust with the electorate in order to get the resources that we need for the system that San Francisco needs, which is not only far better than we're providing now, but far better than we were providing pre-COVID back in 2019.
Yeah, there's a couple questions in there, and now I'm forgetting them, but I'll go ahead with other people's questions. Did you look at equity a lot, as you say, and you have this sort of equity strategy? Do you look at which option would reduce car dependence and car use the most?
Well, this is the key question. So the key values tension of these different options is that the familiar option puts bus lines shorter walking distance from people in specific neighborhoods. And that may be very, very important for people who face mobility impairments in those specific neighborhoods. From a total system ridership perspective, focusing on fast, frequent, reliable service with lines spaced about every half mile or so, that is what optimizes for ridership, for climate, and for economy. And this is a fundamental tension that every transit agency faces. And each transit agency sort of figures out a path that feels most right for it. Each of these options, like we intentionally, I don't do straw man options or straw person options. Each of these options is perfectly valid. It's fundable, it is justifiable from a values standpoint, and it is operationally viable. Choosing among the three is really a values choice rooted in some really tough trade-offs. And that is where we want guidance from San Franciscans, looking at the advantages and disadvantages and helping us figure out what's right.
Since you said that, can I follow up? Can you summarize what values each option represents? Like what different values, what are those choices?
So I think the frequent option tries to prioritize higher ridership, reduced carbon, reduced automobile dependency, and far greater accessibility for services and jobs for all San Franciscans, including in the neighborhoods where we're making hard choices. The familiar option focuses on downtown, and it focuses on shorter walking distances for some people. And in some neighborhoods like the Tenderloin, that may be much more important than it is in other neighborhoods where people would prioritize faster, more frequent service that is a block or two farther away.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about sort of iterating service levels? I mean, there's these big service plan moments, every few months, but then there's also, you've seen ridership change where you see crowding on some routes and empty buses on others. Is there a process, and can you explain that process of like how you look at shifting service, from weekday service to weekend service, or shifting it more, more frequency on this line and less on that line, between big service changes?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and I'll want to have Steve and Sean address it. One thing that I think it's important for folks to understand is that, for example, going from 6-minute service to a 5-minute service is basically a 20% improvement in capacity. And that is a big, big deal on crowded lines like the 38 and increasingly the 22, parts of the 8 and the 9. So seemingly relatively small changes in frequency, don't think about that as convenience. Think about that as well as capacity. We're fortunate that we have excellent data about crowding throughout the Muni system. You can find all of that graphically on our COVID dashboards, where we were really focused on capacity when we were required to meet social distancing thresholds. So we use automated passenger counters to count at every bus stop, people getting on, people getting off. We do the subtraction, and then we compare that against the available capacity on the line. And we can do that both on the average of the day, but also at particular times of day. So the averages have really helped us rearrange our service in a very dynamic way during COVID to reduce crowding, to deal with social distancing. It had the not entirely unexpected result of also dramatically increasing ridership. So as I showed you at the very beginning, the 8, the 9, the 14, they're basically at pre-COVID ridership on the weekends, and on the weekdays not going downtown. But we also know that there's acute crowding, particularly in the mornings associated with the school commute on certain lines. And part of this is due to the way that the school district changed their schedules in a very frustrating fashion. And so that's another thing that the team is trying to do, is to try to figure out not only how do we spread the service out on average, but also how do we deal with acute problems? Oh, another thing also that the team has done that is utterly fascinating is ridership is dead flat during the day. So before we would have a big peak in the morning and then a big peak in the evening. Those peaks are gone, they do not exist. The morning peak, the midday, and the evening peak are exactly the same level now, which is allowing us to rearrange service a little bit to provide, to shift some of the extra service that we'd had at the peak in order to sustain better frequencies all day, which is also helping with the crowding. And Steve and Sean, please, I missed key points. Tell us about the magic that you guys do.
Go ahead, Sean.
First, hopefully I can actually talk here. I think it's.
Sean, no, we can't hear you,
Just
Sean.
like Jeff said,
Sean, we can't hear you. We're going to save your brilliance for our next one of these. Steve, do you want to cover?
Yeah. I'll just. I think you covered most of it, Jeff. I'll just add a minor technical point without knowing what Sean was going to add, which is that this plan again is kind of focused on the midday weekday frequency, and that's when we discuss the plan and we've laid out our alternatives, that's what we've been talking about. But when we actually operationalize this and turn this into a real service plan to implement in February of next year, we're going to be taking a close look because we have great data. We really do have a terrific performance reporting group within the MTA. We're going to be taking a close look at the loads and what the actual demand looks like, and the evening, the weekend, what those service levels look like should match demand. We certainly the weekend demand is coming back strong, as has been mentioned earlier, and I think we're going to try and reflect that.
Great, thank you. Can you talk about the role of transit priority improvements like red lanes and any other things that we can do, especially in the short term, in transit recovery? We got some done during the past year, not as many as we all wanted. Can you talk a little bit about that process and the role of transit priority improvements in recovery?
Yeah, so transit priority has been hugely helpful to us, and we've been moving more quickly during COVID to prioritize transit on our streets than ever in San Francisco's history. And those lines are very successful. So we've done about 14 miles, Steve, so far?
Yeah, I think roughly in that neighborhood. Yeah, the TEDL program. Yeah.
Yep. And for each of those, including on really important corridors like Geary, we are getting about a 20% travel time savings that we're able to invest in improved frequency. We also, of course, for all of our high frequency lines, abandoned schedules during COVID and switched to what we call headway management. So rather than asking the operators to pay attention to precise time points, given the complete unpredictable nature of congestion during COVID, we instead asked all of our operators to simply space themselves out evenly between the bus in front of them and the bus behind them. The result of that is that our reliability is better than it has ever been in all of our data. It's also made life easier for most of our operators. Our operators really like headway management because it naturally accommodates the vagaries of congestion levels and takes a lot of the stress out of their work. And our passengers love it because rather than having 6 buses show up every 30 minutes, you actually have one bus precisely every 5 minutes, which is, it was critical to us during the requirement of social distance. It's also become really useful to us as we're trying to bring ridership back. Later this month, starting the week after next, Caltrans will be striping high occupancy vehicle lanes on Lombard Street in order to prioritize the 28 as well as Golden Gate Transit buses. That is in advance of the Van Ness bus lanes opening early 2022 this winter. And once Caltrans is done with their repaving on 19th Avenue, they'll also be putting HOV lanes on 19th Avenue and Park Presidio, so that all of the state highways in San Francisco that are surface streets will have high occupancy vehicle lanes on them to prioritize transit. They'll be experimenting with that to see how it works. Is it enforceable, and what the right both hours and vehicle occupancy requirement is. So stay tuned for that evaluation.
Awesome. I know, Steve Boland, you worked a lot on those, and it's a huge innovation, and we're excited to see how that works. We want HOV3s. So did you want to say anything more about it, Steve?
Only that we're actually going to be implementing those HOV lanes on Lombard next week. Put that in your calendars. We're going to start on Monday, and we're pretty excited about that. It's going to be a first for San Francisco, really a first, having HOV lanes on city streets for more than a block or two approaching an on-ramp, a first in the state of California. So a really innovative solution. And, Jeff talked about the temporary emergency transit lanes program, but, as somebody who does that for, his 80% of his day job, in addition to this, let me just say that I feel like we really pushed as hard as we could during COVID to, get those red lanes on the ground, see how they work, or not red lanes, but transit lanes, see how they work, analyze that data, share it with the public, see if there's a case for making them permanent. And then we're proceeding because our results have been really good. And so we've been able to pretty dramatically expand our transit priority network in the middle of this crisis.
Right on. Since you talk about communicating with the public, I wanted to switch over to some questions about the survey and how that was set up, the survey for these three proposals. There's a lot of questions in here that I have. One is there are those maps with sort of the dots representing people with greater access to different services and that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's done, the sort of the system behind it, but also, the dots seem to be concentrated in certain neighborhoods, and like the west side and the south side still seem to be not included, and talking a little bit about that work and how you're valuing that.
I mean, part of what's going on there is that's related to where changes are being made. So you're seeing this focus on the Northeast and sort of down into the Mission, and that's because, under these proposals, a lot of the changes are focused there. There's a couple of reasons for that. Historically, the northeastern part of the city has had a very dense route network, and part of the reason that some of these routes, like the 21, haven't been restored previously is because they were very, very close to other routes, unlike other parts of the city where if we were going to provide, that level of coverage we want to see, and we're up to 98% of residents being within a quarter mile of a Muni stop, certainly on the west side of the city and the south side of the city, our pre-existing network had more widely spaced routes. In the Northeast, you see routes much, much closer together. But as far as, what that methodology looks like, it's basically just a 30-minute travel time, again, including any increase in walk time, but, offset by improved frequency on those parallel routes, and does that at the end of the day, in the final equation, get you to a wider range of destinations within a given travel time, whether that be 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And we've used 30 minutes for our analysis, and we've used a walk speed of, I think, 2.5 miles per hour, which, certainly some go slower, some go faster. Your average able-bodied adult will walk about 3 miles an hour. So we try to find a balance there. But, where you see a lot of green on those maps, I think that's just evidence of, what Jeff had talked about a little bit earlier, which is if you really focus your resources on, your most frequent routes and make them even better, even going from 6 minutes to 5 minutes can be a pretty dramatic improvement. You tend to see this, not just in San Francisco, but elsewhere. I mean, there's been plenty of evidence where these kinds of changes have been implemented all across the country and all around the world, that is the kind of pattern that you see.
Another thing I want to emphasize as well is that you don't see any change in the southeastern and southernmost parts of the city because we restored all transit service there first, because those are the neighborhoods that have the fewest mobility choices. So that wasn't even in question. And in fact, for much of the southern and southeastern parts of the city, Muni service is better than it was pre-COVID. The investment in the 15 Bayview Hunters Point Express, plus the improvements in frequency and reliability on the main lines like the 8 and the 9, we delivered better than pre-COVID service there, in part because that's where the essential workers of San Francisco live. And we needed to improve frequency there so that they can get to work and we can still meet the social distancing requirements. One of the things that we're trying to hold on to is the better than COVID frequency that we did to the southeastern San Francisco as we think about our next round of service changes.
Great, thank you. And back to the survey again, a lot of people are frustrated. There's not a lot of, you can't give a lot of input. You sort of choose between these buckets, but you can't talk about the different changes. What more can you do or are you doing to sort of get more of that variety of input? There's also sort of related to that in rider input terms, there's a lot of the online open houses and these meetings like this, which is great, and the signs getting out there, but are you doing any intercept surveys or getting out and talking with riders? How do you reach the riders that are not being served currently? That kind of thing. Like, how are you looking at those questions? Yeah,
those are all very important questions to us. And Mariana McGuire, who's been leading our public engagement, can help answer that. Mariana?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi. So thank you for that question. Yeah, we're still in a little bit of a state of constraint in terms of how much we can do in person with folks. But we are distributing information, paper information via community-based organizations that we're hoping, particularly the surveys, we're hoping that they can get those out to membership, and then we'll circle back around and pick them up. We are also taking the opportunity at tabling events that are taking place throughout the city, which is a really great way to engage with communities and interact really organically with communities. And since those events are already happening, we're trying to capitalize on that as much as possible. So we've been at 3 so far. I think it was 3, it might have been 4. Chinatown Night Out, the Autumn Moon Festival. There's going to be another Autumn Moon Festival event in the Richmond this weekend. We have an event in Potrero coming up, and then Phoenix Day, I think I'm saying that right, which will actually have tabling events in multiple neighborhoods throughout the city. Kat, I see you nodding, you're very aware. So we will have representation in all the neighborhoods, and any other opportunities that arise. We're trying to take advantage of those as well, so that we can talk to people about this, the options, describe them a little bit and describe what's going on. In many cases, point people to our website, because there are a lot of folks who may not have internet access, but there are folks who do and just have not heard yet that they can go to this website, and then help them take the survey. Of course, we have surveys in multiple languages. We have 6 languages right now, including English. And any other opportunities. I mean, we are taking a very robust but also flexible approach to our outreach, that any other opportunities that come about, we want to jump on board, and we want to take as much advantage of those opportunities as possible. So please, we'd love to hear from you and all of your members as to how we can plug in even better. And I think I mentioned to one gentleman in the Q&A, if you all would like some materials to pass out to community members or businesses in your community or other locations that can help distribute and connect with people in person, we are happy to supply materials, and we'd love to help just to get the word out.
Great. And should people just reach out to you directly, or where should they make those requests?
I'll put my email in the chat so folks can reach out to me directly, and I'll help coordinate.
Great, thank you so much. And just a quick follow-up, are there paper versions of the survey, or is it just digital?
There are paper versions of the survey in our languages, and we print them in-house, so we can print as many as needed whenever. And as I mentioned, or I think maybe Steve mentioned earlier, We also have the hotline that we can walk people through the survey if they don't have internet access, but they've seen the phone number. Again, we can describe the changes and then walk them through the survey, take it for them, and input their results.
And we did exactly that over the weekend at the Autumn Moon Festival in Chinatown. The paper surveys were very popular in both Chinese and in English. We recognize that not all San Franciscans have access to online services. And in fact, those are the San Franciscans that we most need to hear from.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. A couple more questions here before we wrap up. Some of the route changes, like taking the J out of the subway, or the 23 not going to West Portal, or even the 5758 things, those are pretty major route changes. How permanent are we seeing those? Is this still just to get us through 2022? What's the process been for getting riders to weigh in on some of those?
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that nothing that we're doing right now is permanent. We're all still in, dire COVID recovery, scrambling to try to do the best we can with very, very different travel patterns that we're trying to accommodate. So we know that there's a ton of what we've done that needs to be reevaluated. And we can rearrange with our existing service hours given our current budget. And better yet, as soon as we identify new sources of funding, we can start making significant improvements. So that's really what we want to hear from all of our riders about, is what are the most urgent needs? Where did we not get the route structure right? Where do we need to invest in greater frequency? Where is there a neighborhood or a corridor that is just not served and needs a new line, a different line, or needs things to just come back the way that they were? We're completely open, and we're just struggling to make the hard choices given our resource constraints.
Great. Excuse me. Back to funding a little bit. What's you've at 45% pre-COVID ridership, I believe you said, overall, but only 25% of pre-COVID fare revenue. Can you talk about that discrepancy a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually a really savvy question. Thank you for asking that. So one of the things that we have invested in significantly over the last year and a half is removing fare barriers so that people can access transit. Nearly, or just over a third of San Franciscans now get free or deeply reduced transit fares. And we just expanded that to include everyone 18 and under. So people 18 and under, people with disabilities, and seniors all get free Muni. And people with very low incomes get deeply discounted Muni. As a result, in the changed demographics of who's riding, namely the near elimination of office workers commuting downtown, the demographics of our riders shifted. And so our riders are much more likely to be eligible for free or deeply discounted transit fares. So, our ridership is doing great. Our fare revenue, is not keeping up, but so long as we are actually delivering critical service at a rate that's affordable for people who need Muni, I would not call that a problem. What I would say is we need to find different, more sustainable and more equitable ways of funding the transit service that San Francisco needs. That's my task, is to figure out how do we deliver service to all San Franciscans, and how do we make sure that price is never an obstacle for somebody taking Muni in order to do whatever it is that they need to do to get wherever it is they need to go.
Great. Then last final wrap-up question. We only have a few minutes left. There are a lot of great questions we didn't get to. But what I'm going to put it on you guys. What do you want the public? You've talked about a lot of things. Covered a lot of great detail on this. What are things that you want the public and SFTR members to know that's not currently being talked about enough on the transit discourse? What are we missing?
So I think, I mean, you all with the Transit Riders Union, I think, have a sophisticated understanding of the complexity of what it takes to deliver transit service. And that our biggest issue for the next several years is going to be, how do we fund the service that San Francisco needs? Muni has lost our key revenue sources, and those are not coming back for a while. So we're going to need your help. We're going to need help from all 11 members of the Board of Supervisors. We're going to need help from the mayor, from the business community, from whoever we can get it from, in order to figure out what are the sources of revenue that get us the sustained, ongoing operating revenue that we need to deliver great service. And how do we make sure that we can get to a 2/3 vote in order to actually get the support from the San Francisco electorate? So that's the primary conundrum that we're stuck with. And in the meantime, given our resource constraints, how should we best allocate our resources in order to serve San Franciscans, particularly given the way that travel patterns have changed dramatically? I mean, those are the fundamental questions that, you know, interfere with my sleep, and that my team is working on really hard all day, every day to try to get us through. And we are so grateful for your support and the support of all of your members, including the tough questions that you ask us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it seems like funding is it. Funding is the big thing. And we do look forward to helping figuring that out and working on that on into 2022. And if there's more funding we can find before the next measure, to be able to keep expanding service faster. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for all of your hard work, your sleepless nights. Go get some sleep. Make sure everybody's getting some vacations. I've seen some people going on vacation. I'm very glad when I see that. So that's good, because we need you around continuing to build the future for Muni with us. So I guess with that, I just want to say thanks again very much for your time. Thanks for everybody who joined us. Again, go to transitmonth.org if you want to learn more about what we're doing next, and stay involved in the conversation. So thank you so much, and have a great evening.